to that directory and all the directories underneath it unless one of those directories has no access for the sales group. However, if you're a member of the sales group and you're in the accounting directory, but you are also a member of the accounting group and there's a directory underneath there that sales cannot access, as long as you're a member of the accounting group, you'll be able to access that directory.
Also, there's a level of permissions that you can enable or apply when also you're doing sharing. And this is NTFS, which is NT file permissions. They enable you to get beyond the security limitations of a shared folder permissions and implement local security on both the folder and the file level. Shared folder permissions can only be assigned at the folder level. NTFS permissions can also apply to a user who is accessing a shared network resource as well as the local resource. And also, NT file permissions are applicable only to an NTFS file partition and not applicable in a FAT format.
NTFS permissions can also apply to a user who is accessing a shared network resource as well as a local resource. NTFS permissions are applicable only to an NTFS partition, not to a FAT partition. It's necessary to have a good understanding of what the NTFS file permissions are and how they will affect the resource permissions that you choose to assign. When a partition is formatted with NTFS, automatically all the files and folders on that partition have their permissions set to the everyone full control. We saw that when we shared my sales directory and my temp directory, that when we went into the permissions directory, that everyone full control was in there as a default. It's important to understand that these default NTFS permissions, especially if you're concerned about implementing security on your Windows NT network, what they are and how you can utilize them and implement them to the best of your network. You may want to remove this everyone full control permission, or you may not. It depends on what you want to do with your network. Be careful, however, how you do this. If you just remove the everyone full control permission but don't add any groups that have NTFS permissions, you can end up with a system that cannot be logged into. If you remember, when I deleted the everyone full control permission to the temp directory, I first added myself and then I removed the everyone. This is so that I was able to log in and nobody else was into that particular directory. In assigning NTFS permissions, it's usually a good idea to assign full control to the administrator group. This table shows the standard NTFS permissions and the folder and file level permissions that are applicable to each one. For instance, with the read permission, you're able to display a folder and subfolders, their attributes, and their permissions. On the file level, you're able to display the file, its attributes, and permissions. However, if I were to have execute permission, I'd be able to make changes to the subfolders in this folder and display permissions and display the attributes. In the file level, I'd be able to run a file if it's an executable and display attributes and permissions. When setting NTFS file permissions, you're able to use a combination of the various NTFS permissions. You can set the NTFS permissions on a per file basis and know that the file permissions override any of the NTFS folder permissions if there's a conflict. When setting NTFS folder permissions, you're combining into a standard set of permissions. When listing NTFS folder permissions, they are typically followed by two sets of parentheses. The first set represents the standard permission on the folder, and the second set represents the permissions inherited by any file created within that folder. In setting NTFS permissions, like I said earlier, the default permission is the everyone full control. You set these permissions to the properties of a file or folder from the Security tab. Keep in mind that to set the NTFS permissions, you must have the right to do so. Not just any user can assign these permissions. You must be a part of a group that has been given that right, or the user account must be given that right in order for you to change the file permissions with the NTFS. The default full control includes the right to change permissions. To assign NTFS permissions, you must be either the owner of the file or folder, given full control, given special access to change permissions, or given special access to take ownership. NTFS permissions can be implemented at both a file and folder level. You must have an understanding of how these two levels interact. Now let's go back to my computer and look at how these permissions look at and try to take ownership or change some of these file permissions on some of the directories in my computer. Okay, let's right-click on my computer and go to Explore. And let's go to the sales directory. As you can see in my sales directory, I have several sales documents. I'm going to go ahead and right-click on this directory, go to Properties, go to my Securities tab, and click on Permissions. Within the sales directory, the owner is the administrators group. And the name of the people that have permissions are the administrators, and they have full control, and the two sets of parentheses are all and all. The creator owner permission level is in there with full control. The everyone group has change permissions, and the system default system group is in there as well. I'm going to go ahead and add myself and give me full control. So now Kathy D has full control. And I want to take out the everyone group so that only I have permission to the sales directory. So I'll click on everyone and then click remove. Now, in order for these permissions to be replaced on all the subdirectories, I need to make sure that this checkbox is checked. And by default, it's checked to replace permissions on the existing files. So I'll click on OK, and it's asking me, do I want to replace the security information on all the subdirectories within the C:\sales directory, and yes, I do. So now, within my sales directory, only I have permission to this directory. However, what I'm going to do is go to one of the files, my Sales 97 file, go to Security, go to Permissions, and as you can see, they inherited the permissions from the directory above them, but I'm going to add the Everyone group, give them read permission, so everybody can read my Sales 97 document. Click on OK. Now what I have done is to take everybody out of the sales directory. So only Kathy D or myself has permission to get within this directory. However, I've given everybody access to the Sales 97 file within this directory. Now what happens in a case like this? The file permission overrides the directory permission. So while everybody will not be able to look into my sales directory or see what's in there, everybody will have access to the sales file within that directory.
So with user rights, with groups and user rights, they actually work interactively, and you need to have a really good understanding of how these two groups interact, or how the rights of the groups interact. So say, for example, you have a particular user, and they are a member of, let's say, a sales group, and they're a member of an accounting group. Then in one group, the accounting group has access to a particular directory, but the sales group does not. If that user is a member of both groups, how do we know which he's going to have access to, he or she? Well, actually, the least restrictive will apply. Users and user accounts interact together and sometimes can override one another or work in conjunction with one another. For example, if you have a particular user, let's call them user A, and they are a member of the sales group, and they are a member of the accounting group, and then you have a network share. If the accounting group has access to this particular network share, it's a shared folder on one of the machines. The sales group does not have access to this particular share. But user A is a member of the sales group and is a member of the accounting group. So being a member of the sales group, technically, user A should not have access to that network share. But because user A is a member of the accounting group, they will have access to that share. So you can see that it can get quite confusing, and when you go to troubleshooting who has access and how you have to really break it down and look at what your users, where their membership is, and the rights of each particular group. Also, over and beyond setting permissions for users and groups, you can also actually take ownership of a particular file. And taking ownership only is accessible or only available to certain users that have the permission to do so.
That's right. Whoever has created the file or folder is by default the owner of that file or folder. As the owner, that individual has the full control over that file or the folder. This includes the ability to assign permissions to it as well as access it and allow others to access it through sharing. The administrator can always take ownership, even if they have been given the no access permissions to the file or that folder. There is no way to give ownership to another group or user, only the capability to give the permission to take ownership. For example, if I'm logged on as Kathy D and I create a folder and I am the owner of that folder, if Kim logs in as the administrator, she can take ownership of that folder that I created and then change their permissions on it. However, she cannot give that ownership back to me. All she can do as the administrator is to give me permission to take ownership so that the next time I log in as Kathy D, I go back to that same file or folder and then manually take ownership back. So once you take ownership, you can't give it back, only you can give permission for others to take it back. By doing this, this prevents any user or administrator from altering or creating files or folders and then making it look like those files or folders belong to another user. It's kind of a security feature that enables you to make sure that whatever permissions are on there, they cannot be forged or look like somebody else is using them. To give someone the right to take ownership, that person must be granted either full control, take ownership, special permission, or change permission on the special permissions. Then you must change the resource permission so that they can take the ownership back. Let's look at the computer screen to see exactly what I was talking about. We'll go to My Computer and right-click and go to Explore. We'll take the C drive, and I logged in as user Ron_D and created this folder called Kim. If we right-click on the Kim folder, go to the Properties, click on the Securities tab, and go down to the bottom option which says View or Take Ownership of Selected Items and click on that. It tells me that for the directory name C:\Kim, the owner is Ron D. Let's close out of here and go to Accounting. Go to the Properties, click on the Security tab, click on Ownership, and we'll see that for the C:\Accounting directory, the administrators group is the owner of that directory. Now, I'm logged in as the administrator, so if I wanted to take ownership of the Kim directory, even though Ron D created it, all I'd have to do is go back to the Properties, go to the Security tab, go down to Ownership, and click on the center button, which is Take Ownership. I get a dialog box that says that one or more of the items selected is a directory. Do you want to take ownership of all the files and subdirectories contained in the selected directories? I'm going to click on Yes. I click on OK, right-click, go to Properties, go to Security and Ownership, and the administrators is now the new owner of the KIM directory. Now you can see that the administrator group, even though that Ron_D created this directory, was able to take ownership of it. And that's basically how you do that. The only exception to this is that the no access permission overrides all others. Even if the user is given full control, but a group is given no access, his permission, if he's a member of this group, is no access.
And also, it's a good thing to remember that with taking ownership of files and setting file level securities, a lot of things that we've been doing here is only possible if you have your machine formatted with the NTFS file system. Because my computer is formatted with FAT, then I don't have the option to do all of this file level security and taking ownership. So if you look at my computer, and you go into My Explorer and expand my hard drive and look at maybe one directory and right-click and go to Properties, you will see a Limited Options tab here, meaning that just about all I can do is I can do shares, I can share, and I can do permissions with shares, but I cannot do file level permissions. I do not have an additional security tab that would be up here where I can take ownership and set individual file level permissions. So using FAT instead of NTFS will limit your options with security.
If you are using an NTFS file permissions and not using a FAT file permission like Kim is using, then there's one little caveat that you may want to remember. If the user has no access permission to a file, but has full control access to the folder that contains the file, the user can delete the file by deleting the folder. This is true only when the user actually tries to delete the file and not when he tries to attempt to move it to the recycle bin. This is part of Windows NT due to the requirements of the POSIX compliance system. And this is also a good test question on the test, so it's important to remember. There is a get around for this, however. If you get the properties for the directory that contains the file, instead of selecting full control, you can select custom. When the list of custom options displays, put a check in each box. This is the same as full control, except that it bypasses the file delete child problem. Make sure the file permissions are still set to no access for that user. And that way, if a person who has permission to the folder but not to a file within that folder, they will not be able to delete the folder, and you can get around this little quirk within Windows NT. Now, Kim and I have gone over a great deal on permissions, and in case you got confused during this section, let's reiterate some of the main rules that you need to keep in mind when involving permissions or shared folders. When combining user and group permissions for shared folders, the effective permission is always the cumulative permission. When combining users and group permissions for NTFS permissions, the effective permission is also the cumulative permission. When combining shared folder permissions and NTFS permissions, the most restrictive permission is always the effective permission.
And remember, with NTFS permissions and file permissions override the folder permissions. Also, with NTFS permissions is the only way to provide local security. As we said before, that shared folder permissions are the only way to provide any type of security on a FAT partition, and they are effective only being across the network. Now we're going to talk a little bit about printing with Microsoft NT Workstation. Microsoft treats printing as a very serious subject on the test, And there's a lot of questions concerning installation and troubleshooting of printing. Microsoft's Windows NT Workstation is a pretty good print server. However, that you need to pay attention and understand the differences in how you configure the printers properly and have the proper drivers, etc. Let's go to my computer and install a printer to my workstation. NT Workstation has a printer wizard utility, and this can be found by default in My Computer, Printers, Add Printer. This is the utility that's included. You can add a printer to My Computer, which is a local printer or local device, this is what I have. I have an actual printer hooked to my LTP port on my computer, so I will do this installation. However, you also can install a network printer server as well. And this is printing to connecting to a network printer or a printer on another workstation that's been shared. I have my printer connected to the LPT port number 1. Now I'm going to have a manufacturer's list. Because I have a newer Hewlett-Packard printer, my driver may not be listed, but I'll go to look for it. Select Hewlett-Packard, and I'll scroll down to look at my available drivers included with this copy of Windows NT Workstation. My printer is the 1120C, and I don't see that driver on here. So I have a disk that I have from the manufacturer, and I will click on Have Disk, click on Browse, go to my CD-ROM drive, go to the Drivers directory, Windows NT directory, find my driver, click OK, and you'll see that the proper driver will be listed there. This is the latest manufacturer supplied driver for Windows NT for this particular printer. Click Next. I'll ask the printer name. By default, it comes up with basically the same as the driver name. Click Next. Now at this point, I can choose to share my printer or not to share my printer. I'm going to share my printer and give it a name. And click Next. At this point, you can print a test page to make sure the installation is going correctly. Now this is something that's proprietary to the type of printer that I just installed, that would show the different features that I can set. And these are particular to the type of printer and the type of printer driver that you're using. Yes, my print page printed correctly. And my printer is installed. If I double click, I can see my printer configuration utility that shows the print jobs and things that we have in queue, and we'll show you this a little bit later. Remember, when installing a printer, the first thing that you want to do is make sure that it is a part of the Windows NT compatibility list for hardware. Also, if you do not have an NT driver supplied, as when we did not when we were scrolling through the list, make sure that you have the manufacturer supplied driver, and it must be made for Windows NT. Also, you must be logged onto the computer to an account who has the right to create a printer device, which would be an administrator or a power user. After just installing my printer here locally and sharing the device, and I called it Printer, Now, anyone on my network that installs a printer now has the option to install a network printer and actually install the driver to run and print to my computer.
Let's look at my computer and install a printer through the network so that you can learn how to do this as well. We'll go down to my Start button, go to Settings, and click on Printers. And I am going to add a printer. The main difference between adding a printer on your local workstation versus adding a printer that's connected to the network is this first screen in your printer wizard. I want to connect to a network print server. Then click on Next. And now my machine is looking out over the network to find any other shared printers that are on the network. Depending on how large your network is, this can take anywhere from a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes. And it's found Kim's machine and the printer that is connected directly to Kim's machine. I'll highlight that, and if you'll notice at the top, it automatically creates a directory to this printer. Click on OK. And the network printer has been successfully installed. All you need to do is click on Finish. And if this is going to be my only printer, I'll just right-click and make sure that it's set as the default printer. And that's basically how to install a network printer onto your personal workstation machine.
With printers, there's a lot of different options that you can set in managing this as a resource. For example, you can actually schedule your printing jobs and give priority to certain users or certain groups on the particular printer. If you look at your computer, I can show you how you can set these types of priorities. You go into your printers folder, find your printer, right-click on it, and go down to Properties. You'll see the standard Properties dialog box, which shows us the many configurations that we can do. If you click on the scheduling, here's where you set your scheduling options. Right now, my printer is set to be always available to any network user at any time. And there's various priority levels that you can set on the print job. By default, it's just set to the lowest. You can also set your spool print document so that the program finishes printing faster. You can start the printing immediately, or you can start printing after the last page is spooled. After the last page is spooled, it's a little bit more efficient on your system resources. Also, by default, your hold mismatched documents is checked, print spooled documents first is checked, and it does not, by default, keep your documents after they have printed, which means that they would keep it kind of in like a print cache file so that in case something happened to your print job, you could resume printing where it was. It doesn't just vanish. So with managing your resources, it can become very important, especially with a network printer, to where you can schedule times that you want the other users to be available or your printer to be available for other users.
Yes, now that we have installed a local printer and installed a network printer and learned how to do scheduling on our printers, there's other types of management that can go in with printing that can be performed after the printer is installed and configured. When troubleshooting some printer problems, one of the most common resolutions if you're having problems printing to your printer is just to stop and restart your printer, or even pause and restart the print job. Kim's going to go to her computer and show us how to do this on her computer.
Yeah, the first thing that I need to do is start a print job. I have just a plain text file on my desktop that I will right-click and choose Print. It's going to locate and print to my default printer, which is the HP we set up earlier. I choose print. Now, my print job is printing. If I want to stop it in the middle of the print job, I have to go into my printer, double-click on my printer icon, highlight the print job, and hit pause printing. What I've done is I've taken this particular print job and paused it. Now, if you have, and you will see the status will switch from printing to paused and printing, which will finish out the print job as it has in the spool. Other than that, it will just halt and pause. This is sometimes necessary, especially if you have this network printer and there's many users and many print jobs listed in this box all queued up. You can pause particular jobs, and therefore the other jobs will bump up in priority. To purge or get rid of the print job, you would go to Printer, Purge Printer Documents, and now it will show the status is deleting and will delete that print job from the queue. So basically, most of your resources or your print jobs can be managed from within that little icon when you click on your printer.
Next, let's talk about redirecting your print jobs. Redirecting is basically the capability to change which print device a